welcome everybody to episode 4 of the ArchCityPoker.com podcast. This week talking about the river. My name is Tony with Arch City Poker, and with me is Nick. Nick, again, how are we doing today?
Doing well. Excited to talk about some general river thoughts, maybe a hand history kind of practical example to help kind of clear things up for you guys. But yeah, I think if you haven't listened to the first 3 episodes, the pre-flop, flop, and turn, that will definitely. I think we would suggest that it'll definitely help you guys understand even clearer what we're talking about in this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going through the lineup here. We're going through pre-flop, we're going through the flop, the turn, the river. And I think after we cover some of these more rudimentary and basic topics, we can really start taking left and right turns a little bit better and getting into maybe specific areas that maybe people are struggling with, areas that other people might find more interesting than these like core blanketed kind of foundational topics. And again, for those listening for the first time, if you're brand new to ArchCityPoker.com or this podcast on YouTube, go ahead and check out our website, ArchCityPoker.com, like I mentioned. And we also have X, we have YouTube, and we have Discord. And within those channels and communities, you have an opportunity to speak to engage with Nick and myself, as well as any other members that are part of the community. And in addition to all that, we would just love your feedback. If there are topics of discussion that you would love to learn about that you have not heard yet, let us know through X, let us know through a YouTube comment, let us know through a Discord request, just a message in Discord. So if you're brand new to the scene, we welcome to have you. For those who are Arch City Poker members, we have a slew of new content that's going to be uploaded here within a day or two. That you'll get a notification on the website that says new modules have been uploaded. Fantastic videos. Can't wait for you to deep dive into it. And now we're going to get into the river topic. And Nick, we've covered the flop, we've covered the turn. Time to get into the river. And without getting into pre-flop, flop and turn, we're just going to start with a generalization of what are some considerations that a individual should have on the river, regardless of maybe how the hand played out. We're at the river, we have to make a decision. What are just things we need to be looking for, or at least thinking about, generally speaking?
Yeah, I think without talking about the previous streets, just general things that I like to think about on rivers. And obviously this is, let's just say it's against general unknown live low stakes players. They're probably pretty straightforward for the most part, probably a little weaker on average, a little more passive. A couple of thoughts or notes that I have my own. Recreational players tend to significantly under bluff rivers, getting there via their own aggression. So if you see somebody double or especially triple barreling, they likely are significantly under bluffing. I also think that they tend to not value bet thinly enough. So when they are betting, you just tend to see really good hands. You don't see some of like the thinner one pairs or worse than that. But more importantly, I think even going back to flop or turn episodes or just flop and turn play in general, even though I know we don't talk about that as much, but capped or uncapped, like how did we get to the river? And at this point, if we have accurately ranged our opponent, we should have the utmost clarity on where they're at within their range. And that will help you determine how or even if you need to put in a bet or a raise, what sizing makes the most sense. Like if you need to go really large to get the most value out of the top of their range, or do you need to possibly bluff small to get them to fold some more like middling stuff, because there just isn't a sizing that's going to get them to fold top of range if they have it at that point. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, guys, but the simplest thoughts are really like capped or uncapped again. And then, we always talk about this. Where are we at within our own range? Like what tier or bucket do we have showdown value? Is this the part of our range or the type of hand that we're just trying to get to showdown as cheaply as possible now? Or do we have a hand that lacks showdown value? And is it a good bluffing candidate? Or is it just a situation where our opponent is so capped that it doesn't matter about blockers or how good of a candidate is it? Can we just bet and get them to fold significantly? So, do we have a value combo? And like I said, talked about sizing, depending on where we believe our opponent is in their range, what type of board it is. So, I mean, we'll get into it more, and this is definitely river is complex because it's basically like the show me street, so to speak. Like it's where the most money is made. And this is where the pots are the biggest, typically speaking. And, over at archcitypoker.com, we're going to have a lot more content that's in depth, a lot of live stream analysis videos where we see some big river play, our own personal hand histories, obviously modules or courses where we go through. It could be like I said, hands that we've played or just practical examples. But yeah, Tony, I think at this point we should just know where our opponent is in their range, and that's the most important thing. And then if we go from there and we understand where we're at, that'll help us determine whether we need to take an aggressive action or not. And then branching off from there, what sizing makes sense based on where our opponent is at. Like what part of their range are we trying to target? What's our goal? And I think through this episode, we'll be able to clear that up even further for you guys.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things that need to be considered when we get to the river, and as we discussed in the flop and turn videos, determining whether somebody's capped or uncapped is just a foundational bread and butter strategy of Arch City Poker. It has led to so many one pots that I've been involved with. Another thing that I've seen a lot, and I'm going to generalize here with like the live low stakes population, so correct me if I'm wrong, but oftentimes what I see when we get to a river, however we got there, the statement you said, when people underbluff the river, I think is extremely true. And if somebody is capable of bluffing the river, they're also capable of bluffing like leading flops and turns and making bet sizes that they haven't really connected a hand with or don't really have a lot. And what I've seen is on the river, if somebody has a straight, a flush, a boat, a set, they traditionally lead into me. And they don't check, wait for me to bet, and then try to come over the top. They'll just take their hand for what it is and just lead right into me. So, and I've also seen that that's just not a very commonly bluffed line. Like anytime anybody's leading into me, it's almost never bluffed. So identifying commonalities or like standards of what I've seen. Have you seen stuff like that as well, where there are common themes or tropes that live low stakes players do on the river that maybe we should be cognizant of?
Well, like you said, I agree with when you see players lead into you, I think they fear you checking back and they're missing out on value. And that's especially true on dynamic rivers where like flushes come in. You see a lot of players will lead into you in that instance. It also just goes back to like whenever I'm in doubt, there are things that the live low stakes population does, especially when the money gets, we like to say at Arch City Poker, like when the money gets real, like when the absolute dollars are much larger, like for that game, players tend to act in a much more ABC or straightforward manner. That's why we like to get them heads up and 3-bet pots as often as we can, because the money is just larger. The pots are bigger, and so they act more straightforward. You get that clarity even earlier in the hand. It allows you to make much better and clearer decisions on future streets. So yeah, Tony, like for example, if I've bet flop and turn and my opponent has check called twice, and then we get to the river and a flush completing river comes in, or an obvious dynamic river, and they lead into me, and it's, let's say like it's $150 pot and they lead for like $100, that's $100 that's a good amount of money in like a 1-3 game. And it's just such a significantly under bluff line that no matter if, and it pains me to say it, because like we've all probably been through this if you played enough poker, but let's say I was betting a set for value and I bet flop and turn, and then I get to the river and they lead 100 on a flush completing river. It's a pretty easy fold, guys. And even if I was shown a bluff, I don't care, because I'm going to be shown a bluff maybe, I don't know, a few times out of 100 that happens. It's just not, no matter if you're shown a bluff or not, guys, like in a lot of spots, or if you see something that's just an outlier, like you don't have to chalk up that spot to you played bad or you need to start bluff catching or playing that spot differently. And this is kind of what I was alluding to before in this rant, is that the live low stakes populations, they will make a lot of the same plays in same spots. And it's, again, much more straightforward play. Whether you are playing for more absolute dollars and or if you're multi-way, that's when you also will see a lot more straightforward plays. So if you see aggressive action on the river, especially if you guys are multi-way, and I know by the time we get to the river, we often are mostly heads up, but if you're 3 ways or more somehow on the river and somebody is acting in a very aggressive manner, whether it's they bet pot into 3 players or whether they check raised, these are huge red flags that we better just have like basically the nuts if we're going to continue. So yeah, Tony, I think on the river, really aggressive actions, and especially the bigger the pot is, the more straightforward our opponent's going to be. And so we just need to understand that old term we talk about, like absolute and relative hand strength, and understand like how strong really is our hand at this point compared to what they're representing. And they're pretty much just always representing the stones. So
yeah, you're talking, and I remember a long time ago when you and I first started working together many, many years ago. And I remember when I was struggling, I was a maybe break-even losing 1-2, 1-3 player. And some of the things you said, I still think about today. And they were things like we're not bluff catching on the river is not a winnable strategy we need to be implementing at live low stakes, because it's an under-bluffed street. And another way you've added to that is, if we consider that we were like, I don't know about this river bet this villain has, maybe we should call and see. People don't balance their good hands with bad hands and then bluff rivers often enough for us to be making calls that are profitable long term. And especially when we're talking about live low stakes, and this is something that resonated with me, is like, unless I absolutely know and I have a unanimous vote in my brain that's like, yep, this is going to be a profitable call, we're gonna call here with ace high, we're gonna call here with a 3rd pair. Unless we know that, it's just not traditionally a profitable decision, because they're just not bluffing often enough for us to call profitably. Sometimes we'll guess correctly, and a lot of times we won't. And if you're new and you're developing your live low stakes game, I'm gonna give Nick's wisdom that he gave to me and give to you, where you don't need to be the hero that's trying to bluff catch everybody because you think everybody can't have it all the time. You might be right in some circumstances, but there are so many other indicators and factors to be considered prior to you making that decision. So if you're not thinking about capped and uncapped ranges or position or what the SPR is or the player type or player tendencies, I think those things come first. But Nick, going a step further, if we were to take these concepts and put them into a hand, you have some hand history from either today or maybe a little while ago. Let's dive into it. Let's learn about a hand that you played and dissect it.
Yeah, just to give you guys one example, and obviously there are going to be a number of ways that we get to the river, but this will kind of give you guys an idea of what we were talking about in the beginning of this episode. And this, again, flop turn episodes, those will tie into this. I make it 15 in middle position in a 1-3 game today with queen of spades, 9 of spades, so queen 9 suited, and an unknown player on the button calls. We are, I believe the stack to pot ratio was considered high. Like he had at least 300 something or 350 or more in a stack, and I had him covered, I remember. But again, queen 9 suited, queen of spades, 9 of spades, he calls. So there's like 35 roughly in the pot. Flop comes 10 of spades, 6 of clubs, 4 of clubs. So dynamic texture, I flop nothing but a couple back doors. Going back to the flop episode, what's our strategy here? We want to check out of position. We're going to get a good feel for where our opponent's at in their range based on whether they bet or check, and if they bet based on their sizing. They tend to be pretty straightforward with their sizings, and we're going to know what to do here. So my opponent on the button checks behind. And so what does that tell us? Well, he probably doesn't have 2 pairs or better. He probably doesn't have a lot of nutty combo draws. Those are a lot of times they're going to tend to bet. So he's quite capped. Turn is a deuce of diamonds. And I decide to bet 25 into 35. Now, there's a couple different ways we could go about the turn. I don't want to get into those because it's mainly a river episode, but just know that, again, our opponent's capped. I don't have anything, but I just don't think he does either. So it's kind of like a game of chicken. So I bet 25 into 35, and he calls. River is now a king of spades. So again, guys, the board is 10 of spades, 6 of clubs, 4 of clubs, deuce of diamonds, king of spades. So the front door flush draw is bricked out. We do get more of a dynamic river, though, in the sense that now there's a new best top pair, best new set, 2 pairs, etc. So at this point, a lot of you, I think, would correctly think to yourselves, okay, I clearly don't have showdown value with queen high, and so I need to bluff, but you're really unsure about the sizing. This is where Tony and I talked about this, where you need, if by this point in the hand, if you have used our strategies, used our suggestions on how to range opponents, how to play these spots, this spot in particular being out of position, flop check through, he's capped. I bet turn because he's capped, he just calls. He's still quite capped. Now that the rivers come in, he just called me pre-flop, so do I think he can have top set now? No. I think he would have bet king 10 on the flop, guys, so I don't think there's a lot of king 10 in there. King 6, king 4, king deuce, I mean, sometimes you'll see in the live low stakes games some suited combinations of those hands, so maybe he could have like a couple of those. I wouldn't say that many, though. But, could he have these unknown live low stakes passive players, could he have called pre-flop with a hand like ace king or king queen and then floated turn with 2 overs, and especially ace king, thinking like that hand is good a lot of times there, which it is. I don't blame him at all for that. So if he has a king, or somehow rarely does have better, guys, then I don't think that's going to fold for any kind of reasonable large bet. Like, could I bet something like 200 into 85 and possibly get him off of that? Yeah, potentially. And there are spots where we would do that. And I'm going to talk about where a different river I think I might do that here. But I also think that the majority of his range, guys, happens to actually be like 1 pair or pocket pair hands or missed draws. And if he does have a missed draw that is king high or ace high, then those don't need a large sizing in front of them to fold. Like, they don't need to face a large size to fold. So I actually opted for a $50 barrel into 85. And a lot of you might say, well, it's kind of small. It feels like they're going to call a lot there. When they see the king, they're going to put you as the pre-flop aggressor a lot of times on ace king, king queen. It doesn't matter what they put you on anyway. Like, it's just a fact that they're going to have a lot of 1 pair hands at best that are worse than the king here. And then they also will have, like I said, guys, ace or king high that you're not thinking enough about. And you can get those to fold, and it's a very profitable spot to go ahead and bet with your queen high. Now, the other part of this also, that some of you guys that are playing just too passively or too weak, is, let's say you took a random stab on the turn and they said, well, he called, I didn't hit anything on the river. And let's say you had a different hand, like let's say you had a flush draw that you were betting the turn with, or whatever the case may be. But like, a lot of guys will just give up there, and we don't want to give up in that spot. Think about it. Like, he checks back flop, dynamic flop texture, just calls a pretty kind of brick turn. Like, the deuce probably doesn't give him like any kind of real hand there. So we're looking at a range that's clearly very capped, and we size in a way now that's like, okay, if he has a king or better again, he's probably not folding anything really reasonable. So let's just go a little smaller here. If we get picked off by a random, king X hand that he has, that's fine. But he's generally going to fold the vast majority of his range. Now, this is where Tony and I would say, like, how we want to evaluate hands and how we study is, let's now change this river in this scenario to now a board pairing deuce. And Now we have 10, 6, 4, deuce, deuce, and the flush draw again does not come in. I would opt to instead bluff for probably very large here, guys, because let's say he does just have a weak 10 somehow, or he has an ace high type of hand, or he has a pocket pair. Well, the flush draw bricked and there's no overcards that came in. So they're going to feel much more comfortable with the same hands that they had when the river was a king. But now it's just a deuce river. So like they just feel better about their hands. Like there's more for us that didn't come in. So we do need to probably size up at that point very large. And I know that's going to be a little unorthodox for you guys. We've talked about this with turn play. But there are going to be spots where, again, the rivers are going to be different and it's going to change our strategy. Now, I failed to mention this in the first example here with the king that was the actual hand. But let's say, guys, instead of the queen nine of spades that I had, let's say I actually flopped top set and I took the same line. I checked flop, it checked through, unfortunately. I now bet turn, he calls again, and let's say it's the king of spades. Well, if I think that a lot of his one pair hands and the ace X and king X stuff, the ace X, yeah, if I think those are going to fold and I don't really care about targeting that part of range, well, if he does have like just a smaller percentage of the time, if he does have like a king X or better hand, let's now size way up and bet like around 150 or 160 because those hands are probably calling that sizing just often enough, at least, to make it the way better sizing than betting like the somewhere in the box that you guys will use between like the $50 to $85. And the pot again was 85. So yeah, Tony, I think the point of this one hand example is obviously to clear things up for these guys a little bit. Just give them, like I said, an example, show them what our thoughts are going to the river, how we might size differently. So I think what's different from like the last episode with turn to river is that on the river, we're going to find ourselves likely using different sizings for value and bluffs, guys, because at that point, your opponent's range is so defined that you can play perfect exploitative poker. And if you feel there's a spot where you need to size up with value or size down with bluffs, then you can do that. And then if there's the vice versa, if there's a spot where you think that you're going to have to go for a bomb, overbet nuclear bomb to get him off of hands that are kind of, higher up in his range, but then you can maybe size down a little bit to make sure those hands call when you have value. That is max exploitative poker. I'm not saying that there aren't going to be rivers in spots where we are sizing the same with our value and our bluffs. And yeah, again, guys, like over at Arch City Poker, there is going to be some, like we are going to have some fallback to a little bit of balance if we do run into like a good or aggressive player, because we do need things to look kind of similar. Like when we value better, we bluff against those kind of players, against like players like Tony and myself, you would want everything to look kind of the same because it keeps you unpredictable. It keeps you from being exploited. But 99% of the live low stakes players, we don't need to worry about that. We don't care about that stuff, guys. GTO, throw that out the window. We don't give a shit about that. So we need to make sure that when we get to the river, if we have gone through the strategies that we have suggested to you guys and we have ranged our opponents properly, we should know pretty much exactly where we stand. Now, are there going to be dynamic rivers that, yeah, they add to your opponent's range? Could they become at that point uncapped? Sure. But we still have an idea of where they're going to be and we still can size appropriately. So, Tony, I think that was a good hand example, just giving them these guys one to kind of help them out. And there's going to be a lot of spots like that where, yeah, again, guys, like if you didn't catch the flop or turn episode, those will help tie a lot of this together. And even with just a podcast or multiple podcast episodes, it is going to be difficult to totally understand everything if you are honest with yourself and you are more of a novice player. But that's why if you come over to archcitypoker.com, we're going to iron this all out for you. And there's going to be courses, modules, like I said, hand history reviews, live stream session reviews where we go through these street by street, and you're going to feel really comfortable by the time you get to turns and rivers where you guys generally feel pretty uncomfortable with your play. I think most players, they feel like they have a rough idea of what they're going to do pre-flop, maybe flop. That is a little bit easier there. But then when the money starts becoming real and decisions start becoming maybe a little more complex, but there's just more aggression on future streets, like more money to be won or lost, of course. Yeah, you guys are, I think, uncomfortable and passive in those spots, and we're going to help you become comfortable and become confident and more aggressive with your game.
Yeah, I mean, excellent points, Nick. To provide a large overview, if you've been paying attention to the podcast, episode 1, 2, and 3, pre-flop, flop, and turn, um, it lays the foundation to make your river play as easy to make as possible. One issue that I as a poker player have had and still have even today is it's hard for me to turn my brain off. I do better against players who are more balanced and more creative in hands. At live low stakes 1 2 and 1 3, that's not really the case. When people are aggressive, more often than not, they have it. So when we're in position, just like in the on the flop, the podcast we had there, in position, we're betting majority of the time when we're the pre-flop aggressor. Out of position, we're checking because we are trying, like as Nick said, to provide a level of clarity to help us so when we get to the river and we have made that determination, are they capped? Are they uncapped? Okay, we think that they're capped. Now I have to make a bet. How big does this thing need to be? What does it mean if I'm going to be making this bet? Because as a viewer and as someone who plays as well, how many times have we all checked the river just to find out that the opponent had second pair or third pair, and we're like, aha, I just should have just went with my gut and bet. And that's easier said than done because if you're new to archcitypoker.com, the concept of overbetting is probably a foreign concept to you. You've probably thought of like betting small or value betting, which is, when people say value betting, they probably think of 75%, I would say. But Nick, would you agree? Like, we've created this foundation. We're trying to get to the river to find clarity, and we're trying to have these little steps, like one step at a time, to help us get to that point. So if we're ever at a river and we're unsure of what to do, how in the moment, because if let's pretend we're in a poker hand and we've gotten to the river and we have to very quickly kind of recall back and re-pick up some of the things that we did to get to this point, kind of touching back to the flop video and the turn video. What are some of those things that we as a poker player can just kind of go back and kind of unstuck ourselves to make a good decision on the river? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think that I kind of liken playing poker to like, I don't know. It's like kind of like putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Like if you go back and, it's kind of like playing detective, I guess is the best way to put it. If you get to a river and you think it's not as clear, try to go back through the hand street by street. And it can be, the more often that you look at this stuff off the table, or obviously if you are on our training site and you're, getting mental repetitions in there, but pay attention when you guys are on the table. Try to practice ranging your opponents. The most important thing, guys, is if you can accurately decipher where your opponent is within their range, that will make your life so much easier. And you should be able to narrow it down by the time you get to the river. So I don't think there will be quite as many rivers where you guys aren't as sure where your opponent's at, because really, honestly, like flop is where everyone's gonna be their widest. And that's why we have the strategies in place in the flop that we do, because it really helps define our opponent's range pretty well going to the turn. And then obviously turn to river is even more exaggerated. So I would go back and replay the flop and turn. And obviously pre-flop, guys, like that's a big thing, is if you have a good grasp of like what kind of hand your opponents most importantly do not have going from pre-flop to flop, that can help you remove a fair amount of their river combos, obviously. So yeah, if you can replay flop and turn and understand, okay, how did we get here? Can I accurately say, is my opponent capped or uncapped? And if you're not sure, if you think they're uncapped, that's okay. But that's where you then go to step 2 and figure out where you're at in your own range. Do you have a hand that's a value betting or raising candidate? Do you have a hand that's pretty clear showdown value? A lot of times it'll be like second pair, maybe a strong third pair, depending on the texture. Where a lot of you guys go wrong on, guys, is when you start to get into like the lower half of that second tier bucket with showdown value hands, like third or fourth pairs or ace high stuff, like Tony alluded to earlier in this episode. And then you get into like your bluffing candidates. If I ever in the live low stakes games feel when I get to a river, if I'm kind of unsure about exactly where, like if I think my opponent is capped, but I think that within my own range, I'm a little unsure how good my showdown value is. Like I think I'm probably good a fair amount of the time. But early on in my career, I would just check back in that spot or check to maybe bluff catch a reasonable size and thinking like, yeah, maybe my second pair weak kicker or my pocket pair that makes the third best pair on the board. Maybe that's good just enough for the time. Maybe it's like close to a break even play or just barely plus EV. But when I started to realize, and this is what crushers will do, guys, is if I put all the pieces of the puzzle together and I realize that my opponent capped or they kind of have like a showdown bound hand as well. If I look to get more aggressive with that part of my range and look to either raise against, maybe little small, like we said, they don't usually thin value bet guys, but maybe like the flop and turn both check through and then they go for a bet and they're kind of capped there. Again, GTO is out the window here. It doesn't matter really what we're representing. I just know that my opponent's very likely capped at that point. Maybe he's going for a little thin value block bet, regardless. Or maybe I check and he does bet a little small. It doesn't matter. There are spots where I think we can take kind of like the bottom half to third of our range and start to play that more aggressively on the. If we're sure that our opponent is like capped, but maybe he has like some kind of showdown value and we do as well. But for the most part, guys, just replay flop and turn. Try to determine if your opponent is capped or uncapped, and then figure out where you're at in your own range at that point. Do you have a hand that's worthy of putting more money into the pot? Do you have a hand that just would like to see a showdown? Or do you have a hand that you think is not going to be quite good enough at showdown? That's where you go back to where is your opponent. And if you don't believe you have the fold equity, then you're just going to have some give ups and you're not going to be able to win every pot. But there are way more pots that you guys are giving up than you realize that you could have won. That's what I would say. If you're ever in doubt, I would err on the side of aggression. If the pot's not too big and nobody's really shown any aggression yet, it's usually a game of chicken at that point, guys. So I know I added a little bit on there with the answer to your question, Tony, but I would say 100% try to replay the streets pre-flop through the turn. How did you guys get to the river? And that'll help you answer those questions, capped or uncapped, where we're both at in our range. And then you should be able to make a profitable decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to do in a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
You feel that it's pretty pressure filled. One thing that you as a viewer of who's watching this podcast, what you can do is on our YouTube and on archcitypoker.com, there are plenty of videos that cover live stream hand histories. And Nick and I will go through and we'll break down the pros and cons as to how they're playing the hand. But what you as a new poker player can be considering, no, we're not expecting you to understand how the environment of a stream game works. So understanding that these people are probably more aggressive than they need to be. But when you watch them through a hand and you see somebody call a bet on the flop and call a bet on the turn, you can utilize that as kind of practice to be like, well, if he's capped or uncapped here, and how would I interact with this hand if I was in the video making these decisions? And when you're not playing in a hand, and we talked about this pre-flop, right? Because we're not limping a lot. We're either opening or we're folding or we're three betting. So there's going to be a lot of times where we're not involved in the hands that are happening at our table. So one thing that's extremely important is when there are players that the money is usually flowing to or around, we want to keep an eye on how the hands are playing. Are they calling a lot on the flop when they're led into? What does that mean? Perhaps you get to see a river and see showdown and kind of then go backwards and replay the hand in your head. The felt is a learning environment if you want it to be, or it could be a time for you to sit on your phone and kind of waste 5 hours of your day while XYZ is happening. But Arch City Poker has the tools to help lead you through the flop, through the turn, through the river, and there is no better person than Nick to go through these hands and really break them down. And they're not $100, $200 games. They're 1-3, they're 2-5, they're 5-10, maybe 25-50 at the most, as far as I can remember. But
Yeah.
utilize those work environments to just kind of see how implement what you're hearing in the podcast. Look at the videos if you're an Arch City Poker member. Go through them again. The PLO Bible and the No Limit Texas Hold'em Bible are just so fundamentally strong that they don't require you to know GTO. They don't require you to memorize charts and hand ranges and have a notebook and a biography of every player at your table. It's bread and butter strategies. And Nick has been around since, years. And he's had an opportunity to see the pros and the cons, and he's won and he's lost, and he's put all these things together for you, the viewer, to really kind of digest and take in. So, again, Nick, talking about the river, from my experiences playing, it lines up very clearly to what you say. A lot of times I find myself overbetting rivers, both with value and with my bluffs, because I often feel that the population is a little sticky. So I find that sizing down on my river bets, generally speaking, tend to get calls, which I can use to my advantage when I want to call. But if I have a hand that bricked, or if I have a hand that had a lot of promise and hope, and we got to a point where, that's no longer the case, I will go back and I'll look at the flop and I'll say, are they capped or uncapped? What do they do on the turn? And if you're speaking to a new Arch City Poker member and they say, Nick, there's a lot of stuff on this website talking about 3-betting, haven't really done it a whole lot, and now we're talking about over-betting. Well, I don't really have a clue, and that really makes me uncomfortable. What kind of advice would you have for that player who's kind of getting out of their shell a little bit and trying to add more tools to their tool belt when they're playing?
Honestly, I would say just the more reps you get, as far as like, you just have to have what we would say in the industry, like you have to have skin in the game. Like you just need to get those live reps in an actual game to shake that uncomfortable feeling. Uncomfortability, those tough situations, and this, you could say this for life, but yeah, on the poker table, that will lead to growth, guys. When I first started playing seriously a long time ago, when I first started learning like that, for example, ace 5 suited was a very standard GTO prominent light 3-bet hand. I was like, ace 5 suited, like that's a hand I used to just probably call with, because I was like, I can make nut flushes with it. It's not that strong. I can just call. I don't want to risk that much with it. But when I realized it had a nice blocker, and it's much more beneficial to either take down the pot pre-flop or get it heads up at worst. And then once I did it more often, I got more comfortable with it. And then the same thing, once I realized maybe not too long after that overbets had a place in No Limit Hold'em. That's the beauty of No Limit Hold'em, is you can bet all your chips at any point, and you can bet more than the pot. There isn't some kind of pot limit structure to hold you back in that sense. So, simply put, Tony, like it might sound easier said than done, but you guys, I think the biggest thing is you have a foundation in place and you have an understanding of why we would put an overbet in. For example, when you come over to Arch City Poker, like we're going to explain that very clearly to you. And honestly, guys, it's just capped versus uncapped. And your opponent's capped, you're not. And so you are able to, not only in practice, because it is theoretically the right thing to do most of the time, but like in practice, we just are able to, as an exploit, a lot of times put in these overbets. And it's just a matter of doing it. It's just a matter of getting on the table and cutting out those chips, cutting out the 100 into 50, cutting out the 300 into 100 on a river bluff or a river value bet. It's just a matter of doing it. And the more often that you do it, the more comfortable that you'll be with it. And you'll almost become kind of numb to it. Like it's just part of the process. It's just something that you do, whether it's kind of like what Tony talked about, whether you are checking range out of position or whether you're betting range in position on the flop, whether you are sizing up or sizing down on a turn or the river. It's just kind of all part of a process. And we have these, like Tony mentioned many times, we have these kind of what we refer to as like these bread and butter strategies that they're in place so that you guys don't have to do that much thinking at the table and you don't have to feel that uncomfortable, because the more prepared that you guys are going into a session, then the less nervous you'll be, the less uncomfortable you'll be. And to just further shake any uncomfortability you have, you just got to get those reps in, and you just got to do it. You got to be willing to do it. You got to be willing to put yourself out there in these games with these, what we're talking about, these overbets or more 3-bets, or even if we get into more aggressive games and we start getting into 4-betting, you just have to be willing to risk a little more to win a little more. And you'll find out that in poker, especially, I mean, holy cow, guys, especially in live low stakes poker, aggression wins out in the end. Bad aggressive players are going to win more often than bad passive players. It's just a fact, because really, we could talk for hours on end through many podcast episodes, many modules over at archcitypoker.com. It comes back to, if you play aggressive, you give yourself multiple ways to win. If you play passively, you just have to hit your hand to win against one or more players. That's it, guys. Like, that's pretty much it. And so obviously there are many nuances or more complexities to it, and we help you guys understand the why of all of that over at archcitypoker.com. But yeah, Tony, I think just telling these guys to candidly kind of just sack up and get in there and the plays, and you become more comfortable the more often you do it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, that really is. I remember you first taught me to be 3-betting and, playing 1-2. And I'm like, that's $45. That's a quarter of my stack. That's a $200 stack. That's a lot of money. What do I do next? So yeah, that's going to go ahead and basically wrap it up for this River podcast. And what I like to think is it gets more exciting from here. So now we get to get into specific topics, right? We get to talk about 3-betting and flush draws and straight draws. And if I'm playing against Nick, how do I play against Nick? If I'm playing against Tony, how do I play against Tony? And we get to get into these topics that aren't so foundational based, but they're still rooted in success in the videos and in the content that we provide on archcitypoker.com. So Nick, one last thing before we take off here, any closing remarks, anything for the viewers, anything to look forward to?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. One, to further add on to what Tony mentioned about future episodes, I think something else that we'll make sure, 2 things that we'll make sure to cover, and I mentioned this in episode 1 with the intro and the pre-flop, is that we will touch base on PLO eventually, guys, so please be patient with that if you're looking for PLO content. The other part is, I think something that a lot of the other training sites or YouTube platforms, poker content creators, something that they drastically neglect is mental game. And so we may have episodes in the near future where we discuss how to handle tilt, what different forms of tilt there are, handling downswings and upswings, because nobody talks about how to evaluate your play during an upswing. There are lots of mental game stuff, kind of concepts that I think we will have good conversation over for you guys as well. And then the second and final part, I do want to go back real quick to somewhere in the middle of the episode. Tony mentioned how the felt is a place where it's a learning experience, and it pays for you guys, significantly pays for you guys to pay attention when you're not involved in hands. Pay attention to what your opponents are showing down. Try to range them, see where they're checking or betting. If you think their frequencies seem a little off, if they're capped or uncapped, and the more often that you do it, and try to grade yourself. Like, try to pick out 10 hands each session, for example, that you're not in, and try to grade and try to not grade, but try to range these opponents and see how close you get. The more often you do it, the more accurate you're going to be, and that's going to help your own game. But another important part of this, guys, I would highly recommend that you listen to what players are saying at the table regarding their own play, their opponent's play in the hand. When they see hands flipped over at showdown, or if they see somebody that shows without going to a showdown, which I think is crazy how many players do that. I might do that every now and then for fun at the table, because I know I'm not worried about being exploited or anything like that, guys. But like, a lot of times you'll hear, for example, like, oh, I knew that he checked back, so I knew he didn't have top pair. And so you know that, for example, that opponent will bet all his top pair better on the flop. Like, those are the kind of things I'm talking about, guys. Like, if you pay attention and listen use your eyes, use your ears. You're going to pick up so much info very quickly on your opponents at the table, even if you don't really know who they are. And then you can use that to your advantage moving forward in not only that session, but future sessions as well. So yeah, Tony, I think we have a lot of fun topics that we will cover coming up in future episodes. Like Tony said, I think it'd be a good idea to an episode where we talk about purely 3-betting, why we do it, what types of hands make sense, what it accomplishes in the live low stakes games, and we can get into more specific types of hands or spots. And then, like I said, mental game stuff I think will be important for you guys. How to handle winning, losing. I think those are, yeah, we can look forward to all of those fun future topics for you.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up episode 4. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and click subscribe, like, and follow our channel. Go ahead and become a member on ArchCityPoker.com. Head on over to X. Follow us. We're going to go ahead and post regularly, and you're going to get first look at all the new content that we create. But other than that, everybody, thank you so much for your time. We'll go ahead and we'll see you next week.